when it came to an issue like homelessness in the United States or 2 billion people without clean water, a billion starving people, I remember first hearing someone refer to involvement in these issues as justice. And I thought, justice, that seems like a misuse of the word. I didn't understand. I understood how it would be called compassion, um, but not justice. What is the injustice here in homelessness, in malaria killing more than any other um, killer in human history? The injustice in, um, you know, tyrants and rebels and uh, a billion starving people. Uh, so we need to be careful about how we use the word justice. Um, I'm going to look at four common types of the word justice and note that they overlap. So, in order to have procedural justice, you need to have commutative justice, for instance. Probably to have distributive justice, you need to have some procedural justice. So the terms overlap, and then people use other terms as well, other types of justice, but I think that all of those other types can fit into one of these four. Uh, so when we're talking about social justice, we need to explain what kind of justice we're looking at. Do you mean by that distributive justice, that goods are distributed in an equitable way or in a completely equal way, or that they're do you mean other types of justice like that? There we can count on the court system to be fair. We can count on criminals to be punished and such. Uh, so the first type of justice that I want to look at is commutative justice. And that's an essential part in transformational development work, because what it means is that people know that when they pay for a product, they're going to get that product. It's going to be honored. The contract will be honored. They know that when a bank loans money, it knows that it will be able to get its payment back. If the bank doesn't know that it's going to get its payment back, there's not commutative justice, then the bank will stop loaning money and people will no longer have access to capital. So in order for microloans to work, for instance, or for countries to, enter the global marketplace and have the benefits of globalization, there needs to be commutative justice, that when I buy land in this foreign country and invest in it, that the land won't be taken away from me. The contract will be honored. Now, commutative justice also means you get what you deserve. And this also is part of transformational development. A lot of the involvement, for instance, in stopping sex trafficking is guaranteeing that that those who are complicit in the sin of sex trafficking will get the punishment that they deserve. So some of commutative justice comes from the lex talionis, which is in Exodus 21:24, an eye for eye, tooth for tooth. And then think of the laborers in the vineyard in Matthew 20. See, it's not, when it comes to distributive justice, one might argue that everybody should get exactly the same wage, or everybody should get a government mandated wage, maybe a certain amount of dollars per hour. And so the one who worked 10 hours receives more than the one who worked 1 hour. Procedural justice would mean that the laborers are paid as promised. In other words, that if you promised to give someone $100 for 1 hour, you give them $100 for an hour. And so commutative justice as well has to do with honoring these contracts. It means that when you say you're going to do something, you're held accountable for it. Otherwise, you're brought to court and punished for not following your contract. Now, restorative justice is what Christians tend to be very interested in at a heart level or at a discipleship level. This has to do with restoring broken relationships. Now, we do have restorative justice in the legal system. For instance, when a person is convicted of drug-related crimes, sometimes they have to do community service, for instance, speak at schools about the dangers of drugs. And so that would be restoring the community, and in a sense, it's the person who has broken the law related to drugs. Instead of just sitting in a prison cell, he restores his community. He brings shalom or health back into his community that he has wronged by doing drugs, by trying to do something right. And so Leviticus 6:2, when you steal something, you don't just go to jail, you restore that back to the person. And both need to be there. The commutative justice says that you are that you have a punishment because you've sinned against the community. The restorative justice says that the person who was wronged gets their money back. Both have to be in place for there to be justice. It's not fair if I steal from you and then I just give back to you. I have restored the relationship with you, but I've also stolen something from the community by being a thief, and so I need to, in order to restore that relationship with the community. That's why a thief would also serve a prison sentence, for instance, is to pay the punishment to the community and not just to the person that he has wronged. So you can see in Matthew 18, if your brother sins against you, you confront him, you bring others to confront him. And 1 Corinthians 6 talks about not taking a brother to court, instead solve it within the family of God, according to kingdom principles. And so, notice that for shalom to be in a community, there probably needs to be a government-run commutative justice agency that makes sure people honor their contracts, that private property is honored, that loans are paid back. There needs to be a procedural justice run by the criminal justice system to make sure people get fair trials. But a criminal justice system is not great at restorative justice, and so that is more of the role of the nonprofit organizations, of community organizers, of Christian universities, and of churches and such, is to make sure that communities are restored and not just that criminals pay their dues to society, or just that contracts are honored. Okay, now there's distributive justice, and I think this is where it overlaps the most with it talks on social justice. What they're picturing is that goods are distributed in a just way. Now, the libertarian view on distributive justice is basically no outside involvement, just let the world take its course, and so to not try and interfere with the ills of society through large government programs, for instance. The utilitarian view is more of how can goods be distributed in such a way that results for the most good for the most people. And that may not be that everybody receives what's equal. Maybe what's utilitarian is some sort of pyramid shape where, not exactly just a meritocracy, not necessarily just based on capabilities, but somehow there would be some criteria that says goods need to be distributed basically in a funnel shape or a pyramid shape, so that let's say those who have the most knowledge, the most capabilities, the most ability to create jobs, have the most capital available to them, and therefore the most rewards and incentive available to them to create jobs for the rest. We'll look at here at neoliberalism is a view, basically the modern fair market, free market value, free market approach, which says that the goods should be that a entrepreneur should be able to set the prices, to set the wages, and an entrepreneur should be rewarded based on his or her ingenuity. And so basically some are going to make a lot more money than others based on their ability to capture market shares. Now, communism has a very different view that says that the government should control salaries, should control production, should control distribution. And neo-Marxism, instead of looking at, which was based on communist idea of setting the powerful against the oppressed, viewed distributive justice it through the lens of who has access to resources, and in what way are they marginalizing others? And so, a way to right this unjust situation is to basically create equity, or the ability for those who've been marginalized to have more access to resources to kind of level the playing field. So, if you look at the book of Acts, you do see an emphasis on distributive justice, in the sense that my property in Acts chapter 2 through 5, one Christian's property was shared with the rest. Now, maybe some had more access to larger resources than others, but that they saw it as belonging to the community. And then you see in Acts 6 that there are still those who are poor without resources. You have the widows, for instance, and yet the church wanted to make sure that goods were distributed, that no one was going in want. Now, it may not be realistic to transfer the view of ownership, wages in Acts 2 through 6 onto a modern world, a 21st century world where there is free market capitalism. But you can see that there is certainly more of an emphasis on making sure people have their needs met than your typical libertarian or neoliberal enthusiast who is only interested in the rewards of entrepreneurship and not interested in making sure people have their needs met. So the last type of justice here, procedural justice, is interested in fair trials. For instance, making sure that those who are, let's say that women have an access to literacy as much as men do, that in a pluralistic society, everybody has an access to voting, everybody has an access to education, everybody has access to real estate and to capital and to loans. And so a lot of emphasis on procedural justice comes down to making sure that certain religious groups or minority groups are not kept from advancing or from developing in transformational development terms. And you can see a little emphasis on procedural justice, like when Nicodemus wants Jesus to get a fair trial, and in Deuteronomy 10, 17 through 18, Leviticus 19, and Exodus 23, saying don't be biased, when it comes to procedures. Use honest weights and measures. Okay, so I've gone through 4 types of justice here. It's just important that if you're going to use the term justice when it comes to transformational development, you know what kind of justice you're talking about. And if you're specifically looking at distributive justice, it's important to recognize what is distributed, what is just when it comes to distribution. Is it based on merit? Is it based on effort? Is it possible to have equal access without having equal wages? So these are the kinds of questions that we need to think about when we are looking at justice and social justice and transformational development.